Good afternoon, everybody. So I'm here to offer you a little brief introduction to a program that's just underway. It's quite modest at this stage. We're very, very happy with it. We're delighted by the support we've gotten, and we adore the kids that have been involved in it thus far. It's a great privilege, particularly as an academic historian, to be invited and to participate and sit through today's proceedings. Outside of my colleagues in education and neuroscience and the researchers whose work has been talked about here today at some length, I don't think I have to remind you how antediluvian the academic world is in regards to the insights and practices that you all know so well. So it's really wonderful as an educator to be here and just sit and soak it in. And I have to say, and the students who preceded me, of course, touched on it with the most poignancy, but you can't sit here and not think, if you are fortunate enough to be a parent, about your parenting too. So that mixture of one's professional life and one's parenting or personal life or interaction with students beyond your profession or young people is really fulfilling and very, very exciting. So I'm a rookie at this work with students, young people, outside of my collegiate education that I work on. I teach undergraduate and graduate students at the University of Southern California, largely in courses on the 19th and 20th century American West. The little think tank, the itty-bitty little think tank that I run and have the privilege of running at the Huntington Library in Southern California is designed to train students in this. And we do a lot of work with the K-12 educational community, the teachers. We've had a track record of working with teachers across the public and private school spectrum in greater Los Angeles for about 10 years. It's wonderful work. It's great to work with teachers. Essentially what we do is we reach out to them, bring them to a place like the Huntington Library, which if you don't know it is a remarkable research institution in Southern California. And we work with them on curriculum and unit design, recharge their history batteries, if you will, help them with lesson plans, etc., talk about the newest academic work. And it's wonderful because you can work with the K-12 community and the multiplier effect to students is obvious and really great. But increasingly, I and my colleagues have realized that our interaction with the young people themselves has been quite limited and very, very small. We have done a fair amount of work because of my field on the history of California, which, as you all know through state standards, is designed for 10-year-olds. So we have done a fair amount of work with the fourth grade community, but we hadn't done much work with the high school age kids. And so that's where this program comes from. This program is called the Los Angeles Service Academy. It's something that we've wanted to start for a number of years. We had some false starts in the search for funding for this, but then we were very, very fortunate to reach an audience with Bernadette Glenn, who just introduced me, and the WHH Foundation, which has so generously supported the project as we get it off the ground here in its first years of iteration. So it's been frankly, and I think our very first speaker this morning talked about the soul-fulfilling work that we all do or find ourselves in and feel fortunate in doing so. This is my version of that. This kind of work for me, I adore my academic work, but it's pointy-headed academic work. I like it, but I really love this work. So this is a dream come true for me. Let me tell you a little bit, very briefly, what the Los Angeles Service Academy is and what it's trying to do. The design was motivated by an awareness, both as an educator and as a resident of greater Los Angeles, that almost regardless of socioeconomic background, young people in Los Angeles don't get out of their neighborhoods. The wealthy kids may travel afar, but they don't travel through LA. And the poor kids, by almost definition, have a difficulty oftentimes getting out of their own neighborhoods, even though our public transportation system is not as bad as you all up here think it is. But I knew that there was a challenge there. Los Angeles is gargantuan, and it's difficult to navigate, and it's complicated, and it's historically fascinating. I knew there was an opportunity there, if not even an obligation, to get kids to move about a bit, to get kids to know neighborhoods beyond the confines of their own, and also in the mix to get them to know one another. And so the Los Angeles Service Academy is a project built around, at this point, just over 20 students with an ambition to grow quite big, hopefully. A project designed to bring students together from a variety of backgrounds, neighborhoods, across the entire basin of Los Angeles if we're lucky, and move them around with a couple of things, ambitions front and center. The first ambition is to teach them about the infrastructure of Los Angeles. How does Los Angeles as an organism, as a metropolitan organism, as an historical site of urbanization like the likes of which the country's never seen, how does it work? And how can the kids, in knowing that, exercise more confidence as citizens, as decision makers, as advocates, as activists, as students, etc. So the design was to reach out to high school kids who had an expressed interest in public, civil, or civic service. So in some respects, not the valedictorian kids, although we have very terribly bright kids, but not the kid who has every advantage given their academic excellence, but a kid that looks a little different than that. The kid that's fascinated by where does the water come from in LA, or the kid whose family members may work for an agency, or the kid who actually, despite obstacles, has gotten around Los Angeles a bit and knows the place a bit and wants to know more. So we reached out to a group of schools, community leaders, administrative officials, some folks in your line of work exactly, and tried to identify, beginning about a year ago, tried to identify a target set of students from a diverse array of schools. 80% of our students are public school kids, 20% are private school kids. That mix was very important to us. I had many an advisor tell me the private school kids have every advantage, concentrate on the underserved kids universally, but I wanted the mix. So again, 80% are public school kids, 20% are private school kids. Of the 80% who are public school, I would guess about 90% of those kids are first generation US and first generation high school. Those are the communities we've reached out to most ambitiously with the public school kids. They're all high school juniors, and that's by design. I'll get to that in a second. You see in the picture there, I'll tell you what this is in a minute. There's some older folks in there. Those are teachers. We also designed a wing of this project, of the Service Academy, to reach out to a smaller group of teachers. They tend to be social studies teachers, government teachers, civics teachers, that kind of line. And we reached out to teachers and built a wing of this where we include the teachers, not as teachers per se, although as someone noted earlier today, once you're a teacher, you're always a teacher. They don't have any obligation to the students. They're brought along to learn alongside the students as well, and they're brought along to share best practices with one another in smaller group settings of teachers. The array of programs, the way it's set up, is really quite simple. Once we identified our students, and we started, I had naive, terribly, terribly naive notions of beginning with 100 students. And thankfully, our funder said, that doesn't make any sense in the world. You'll trip over yourselves. You'll blow it logistically in the first year. Start small and grow, which turned out to be very, very fine advice. So as I say, there's 21 of them. They come from 7 different schools in Los Angeles, greater Los Angeles, and 6 teachers. There's 3 collegiate interns attached out of an urban and environmental studies program at Occidental College, our neighbor to Pasadena in Southern California. And there's 1 high school intern who is a year older than the juniors because she's going through the college application process. And we wanted her in there to help mentor the kids thinking about college. So that's the array of the group. Then what we did is, once we got secured our funding, I hired an executive director who's a friend of mine and a very fine historian of race and ethnicity in America in the 20th century. He became the executive director. He and I run the program together. The program began with some ice-breaking social events to get the kids to start to know one another. They come generally in clumps. They generally come 2 or 3 from that school, 2 or 3 or 4 from that school, 2 or 3 or 4 from that school. That's just happenstance in some respects, but also so they have buddies and transportation alliances to get to where we need to get them. Our 2 institutional partners are the Huntington Library, a rarefied and oftentimes terribly snobby but remarkable institution of higher research learning, which has if you've been there, it has a very intimidating air, and I wanted those high school kids to walk around it like they owned it. And so we've brought them into it, and we've utilized the Huntington as a great partner, and I have to say, with all congratulations to my colleagues at the library, they've responded magnificently. the Huntington Library, and then the Central Library in downtown Los Angeles because of its centrality, because the youth library programs are so good, and because the library welcomed us with open arms as a central place for these students. The design of the program is, as I said, simple. We began after the ice-breaking events and choosing our class. We began with an intensive 4-day, all-day, 4-day back-to-back summer session where, as academics, my colleague and I taught the students, and it's a challenge. These are 16-year-olds, and you all know this better than I. The difference between these kids and my college freshmen can be really a lot. So it was a real challenge, but the kids are great. We taught them in a series of 4-day workshops about the history of Los Angeles, about the infrastructure of Los Angeles, about how does a city work, what are the decision-making that happens on an everyday scale, what are the decision-making processes that could last for centuries, etc. We did that largely at the Huntington Library because we can pull out the absolute knock-your-socks-off treasures of historical research and primary sources. We allied with the curators at the Huntington. We brought the kids into the vaults at the Huntington where they saw the Gutenberg Bible. They saw the first printing of Dante's Inferno. They saw Henry David Thoreau's handwritten manuscript of Walden. Things that have nothing to do with Los Angeles, but they're a way to draw those kids into the excitement of pointy-headed academic research. But it's a way to draw these kids into the glories of a research library and the fact that they could be treated as colleagues in this pursuit of knowledge. Largely, it was about Los Angeles that first 4 days. And then the heart of the program, their junior year, is we break up the infrastructural background of Los Angeles into a series of nodes: transit, environment, business, sports and entertainment, governance, law enforcement, jurisprudence. You get the idea. We divide those nodes up, and then one Saturday a month, the students meet. We meet with them either generally at the Huntington to start or at the Central Library to start, with some variance in that. And through the course of a morning, and we were guided very, very well by youth professionals and practitioners of youth programs to feed them very well, to take a lot of breaks. You know, a 3-hour collegiate seminar is not what they're ready for. So we spend the morning with them, and through a series of very directed, carefully orchestrated, frankly, interventions about the topic. So our first one was, where does the water come from? And it may surprise you up here, it doesn't all come from you. A lot of it comes from the Colorado River. So where does the water come from, and what decisions are going to have to be made in an era of climate change in Southern California these kids are going to have to know about? So we spent the morning talking about water, getting some lecture material, playing with some historical materials and photographs, etc. And then this was our first day in the fall. Then we have transportation assigned to this. We fed them. Our bus picked us up and took us to this facility, which is the Weymouth Water Treatment Facility in Laverne, in the city of Laverne in Southern California. It is the chief headquarters for the Metropolitan Water District's decision-making about distribution of the Colorado River into the Los Angeles basin. So we very carefully picked people who can guide us through these things, that are decision makers, that are willing to grant significant time to a high school age program, and can take these kids through not your usual tour. These tend to be, by design, behind-the-scenes tours where we're trying to empower the kids to have common information and knowledge, and then interrogate or ask questions of the folks that take us through. So our guide to the Weymouth facility took us all through it. We saw remarkably interesting distribution facilities and computer rooms about the water. And then we went up to the roof and saw the basins that they use to treat water and how the water is both intake and outtake into its distribution patterns. Really wonderful. The kids, this was our first event, but you can tell, I think, they really liked it. And the teachers were gaga about it. They loved it. And then we've built into, following from that, a series of other visits. One of our business node, we went to an aerospace manufacturing facility and had a shop floor tour by the lead technologist of that company who took us through things. Then we had an Idea Lab entrepreneur talk to kids about entrepreneurship in Southern California. Then we had a 22-year-old entrepreneur tell us about his startup and inspire the kids about startup entrepreneurship in Southern California. Most recently, we took a law enforcement tour with the deputy chief of the Los Angeles Police Department, who took us through the new station in downtown Los Angeles, as well as the facility where all the 911 calls come in Southern California. And that morning was preceded by a discussion with civil rights attorney Connie Rice in Southern California about civil rights, about the LAPD, about her history of both a kind of love-hate relationship with the LAPD, and a chance to empower kids through. The other thing we do is we supply the students with, we're trying to build their libraries. So all the kids are getting books, we're distributing articles. We're not telling them they have to read them. Well, it's not quite right. We're encouraging them that we'd like them to read them. But we're trying to build up their libraries, and I've made a couple of claims of the students, which is, I'd like you to read them, but what I'd really like you to do is not sell them. Hold on to them, you'll come back to them, put them in your library, build a library of Los Angeles, you'll refer to it, your families will refer to it, etc. So we're going to move across the nodes. We're going to run out of time before we run out of nodes, of course. Take them through their junior year. We've had near 100% commitment. The kids, they seem to really like it. Their cliques and clumps of school allegiance is breaking up. So the public school kids are mixing with the private school kids. The public school teachers are mixing with the private school teachers. That's wonderful. We're keeping a very light touch on that. We're letting it develop its own legs and wheels underneath it. This Saturday, we're going to Union Station in downtown Los Angeles to do a transit day. We're hearing from the Metropolitan Transit Authority architects about redesign of the station and the policy implications of that. We're hearing about the history of Union Station, and then we're going to hear about automobility and movement of people around Los Angeles, particularly with reference to freeways and freeway construction and what those do to neighborhoods. Because I've got kids here in the program whose neighborhoods were bifurcated by freeways 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago and have never recovered. So the kids know that, and then we'll have the scholar types come and talk to them about it as well. We'll move from that on to a sports and entertainment moment where we're going to go to the ESPN headquarters in downtown Los Angeles. We're going to talk about the NFL coming to Los Angeles and what does that mean if it does come, what do the students think of that, etc. We're going to visit the Los Angeles Harbor. And again, these are carefully designed so that we don't just show up. We actually, and also it's difficult because it's a Saturday. So we've got to get the keys to the kingdom and get the right people there to take the kids through. We're going to do a food and housing unit in downtown Los Angeles and over into Watts and talk about public gardens. The gardening discussion here earlier reminded me of this. Particularly the working class kids in this program know something the private school kids don't know, which is that people have always had gardens, particularly the poor. And the notion that we now have a resurgence in community gardens, yes, but people have always gardened their own vegetables. They've always grown their own food. So we're going to unpeel that back in Southern California. And then lastly, we're going to end with a cultural institutions session where we're going to visit some of the chief cultural institutions, probably the Getty, probably the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, and do a behind the scenes of those places and talk about what is museum connoisseurship in the 21st century and what should students know about it. Very quickly, that's their junior year. Their senior year, they all get internships. They all get internships through the nonprofit wing of the Los Angeles Chamber of Commerce, which runs a Get to Know LA kind of program for mid-career professionals across the occupational strata in LA. So we're just going to line up the kids with one of those people. In other words, somebody who works for the Department of Water and Power agrees to take on one of our kids as an intern. The kid that says, that day I was really fascinated by water, I want a water internship. They all get those. We've gotten thus far one, but I think there's about two more coming. Dedicated USC scholarship for a kid. If a kid gets into USC from our program, they get, well, they may, if one kid gets in, they get the scholarship. If two get in, we have to find another scholarship. We've got a scholarship for them. We're going to work with our other schools in the area to get them as well. We're also working with Dave Eggers' outfit 826, which is helping these kids, if they wish, to work on their collegiate essays with, in some respects, the advice of the high school intern who's just gone through all this. The real challenge is getting them to talk to themselves. This is all that non-cognitive stuff. This is, I mean, that was just music to my ears. That's what we're trying to do with these kids. There's no testing of this. There's no academic evaluation other than tracking their progress and maintaining touch with them over the years. My ideal ambition is that 20 years hence, 7 of those kids are in positions of agency, nonprofit, civil, or public service authority in Los Angeles, and they talk to each other. Because then you pull the basin together and we've done something. But it's really fun, and I can't tell you what today has meant to just sit here and learn from you all about what's going on and keep that folder of material that we're so graciously given right on my desk. Thank you very much.